I am not the monster society thinks I am. Something went very wrong that night. I was not myself. I was a good mother, and I love my boys. It's October 1994, and a desperate search for two young boys has gripped the nation.
I want to say to my babies that your mama loves you so much.
Their mother, Susan Smith, claims she's been carjacked and her sons, Michael and Alex, taken by a black man. The boy's father, David Smith, sticking by his wife's side, just like much of the country. But it's all a lie. After 9 days of searching, Susan Smith confesses to buckling her boys into the family car and driving it into a lake. Susan Smith is convicted for their deaths and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Now, 3 decades later, Smith is up for parole. And for the first time since her trial, she will hear her ex-husband David speak out to oppose her release. Your ex-wife is going to face a parole board, and you're going to be there. What do you plan to say?
They can't let her out. For 30 years is just not enough. This wasn't an accident. She deliberately killed Michael and Alex.
You don't think she's been rehabilitated?
I don't think she'll ever be rehabilitated. To me, she's never even been really sorry for what she did.
Susan Smith's incarceration has been troubled. In 2000, she was transferred to a new prison after having sex with 2 guards. She's also been disciplined for drug use. In 2015, she wrote to a local newspaper reporter saying, quote, I am not the monster society thinks I am. Something went very wrong that night. I was not myself. I was a good mother, and I loved my boys.
I've never denied that she was a great mother up until the moment that she killed him.
No signs.
No signs that she would ever hurt them. That's why I believed her the whole 9 days. I never doubted her.
David's emotions turned dark during Susan's trial. As you sat there during the trial, what was going through your mind?
I used to sit there and look at the back of her head and then look at where the bailiffs were and think about killing her. How quick could I get to her? Could I reach her before that officer reaches me? Yeah.
You wanted her dead?
I did.
David Smith has remarried and is a father again, but he's never forgotten Michael and Alex.
Usually it's a song that I hear. No, not any particular song, just different songs. And it just makes me remember how much I miss them. How I wish I could tell them. I miss you so much.
His anguish, he says, would be greater if Susan is released. If she does get paroled, do you worry that she's a threat to society?
What scares me is that she would get out and then running into her somewhere.
Why does that worry you?
I don't want to see her. I don't ever want to have to face her. Craig, God gives us free will. And that was her choice that night. Nobody else's choice. Nobody made it for her. She made the choice to murder Michael and Alex.
Have you forgiven her?
Of course.
Why?
It doesn't make the pain any less. But I had to forgive her. And to move on with my life, I had to forgive her, because it was just going to eat me up if I didn't.
Susan Lee Smith was 23 years old, a young mother of 2, recently divorced, financially strained, living a life that from the outside appeared fragile but manageable. The kind of life many people around her recognized. Small town, limited options, routines built around survival rather than ambition. Michael was 3, old enough to talk, old enough to ask questions, old enough to recognize when something felt wrong. Alexander was 14 months, still learning balance, still dependent on arms that would lift him without thinking. Their lives were structured by ordinary rituals: car seats, daycare drop-offs, evening baths, familiar routes driven again and again until the road itself felt predictable. Predictability can feel like safety, but it can also feel like confinement. Susan's public image was not extravagant. There were no carefully curated social media timelines. This was the mid-1990s. But there were home videos, smiles recorded on birthdays, family photographs meant to confirm that things were holding together. What people saw was a young woman trying. What they did not see was how effort can hollow a person out when it is driven by obligation rather than desire. Those close to Susan described her as soft-spoken, polite, not confrontational, someone who avoided conflict rather than provoked it, someone who internalized disappointment instead of naming it. Avoidance, when practiced long enough, can begin to feel like identity. Financial records would later show pressure mounting. Bills overdue, limited income, dependence on others for stability. The kind of stress that doesn't explode, but compresses. And then there was the man. A relationship Susan entered quietly. A man who represented something she had not felt in years. Lightness. Attention without responsibility. A future that did not involve car seats or daycare schedules. He told her, plainly, that he did not want children. He did not phrase it cruelly. He did not issue an ultimatum. He simply stated a boundary. And Susan heard it not as preference, but as instruction. What followed was not a fight, not a breakdown, not a visible spiral. It was withdrawal. Friends noticed she seemed distracted, less present. Conversations shortened. Her attention drifted elsewhere, as if her body remained in place while her mind rehearsed another life. This is how deterioration often looks. Not chaos, but quiet subtraction. In her private world, an alternate future began to take shape. One where she was unencumbered, desired, free to move forward instead of circling the same constraints. Fantasy does not arrive as danger. It arrives as relief. And when fantasy becomes a solution rather than an escape, something fundamental shifts. On the night of October 25, 1994, Susan Smith placed her children into their car seats. This detail matters. Car seats are not improvised. They are deliberate. Straps checked. Buckles fastened. The act requires time, attention, repetition. Michael was old, enough to trust the ritual, to understand that this meant movement, safety, familiarity. Alexander could not understand anything beyond the sensation of being secured. There was no argument, no reported struggle, no neighbors describing raised voices, just routine. Susan drove to John D. Long Lake, a place she knew, a place not chosen randomly, a place she had visited before. The car rolled forward, and then it disappeared beneath the surface. When Susan later described what happened, her language was measured. She did not describe chaos. She did not describe loss of control. She described sequence. Sequence is not accidental.
I do understand why they're having to do what they're doing. I'm all they have. Right now, they have not been able to rule anyone out. I don't think I'm any more of a suspect than anyone in this case right now.
It's very painful to know that anyone would think that either of us had anything to do with this abduction of our children. But me and my wife know the truth.
Afterward, she returned to the road and waited. When police arrived, they encountered a woman who appeared distressed, but composed. She spoke clearly. She offered a description of the supposed carjacker. A black man. Vague features. No distinguishing details. The claim activated a familiar narrative, one that law enforcement and media outlets had seen before, one that carried unexamined assumptions. Searches began immediately. Roadblocks, helicopters, community mobilization. Susan appeared on television. She cried. But her cries came in waves, not ruptures. Her pleas were direct, controlled. She asked for the safe return of her children. She addressed the supposed abductor as if speaking into a void. The nation watched and believed. Belief is powerful. It fills gaps. It discourages doubt. It allows stories to settle before they are tested. But investigators are trained to listen not just to what is said, but to what remains consistent under pressure. Susan's story did not evolve, but it did not deepen either. Details remained static. Emotion did not escalate. Her grief did not fracture. There were pauses that felt rehearsed, answers that arrived too smoothly, and then there were the timelines. Witnesses could not confirm the carjacking. The route did not align cleanly. The lake, quiet, nearby, overlooked, began to draw attention. When confronted with these inconsistencies, Susan did not rage. She did not collapse. She paused, and then she confessed. The confession was not cinematic. It was not complete. It arrived in pieces, clinical, detached, as if describing a sequence she had already rehearsed internally. She said she had let the car roll into the lake. She said she watched it sink. She said she believed the children were asleep. Belief does not change outcome. When the car was recovered, the truth settled heavily into place. Michael and Alexander were still strapped into their seats, still positioned as they had been left. The investigation shifted from search to reckoning. Psychologists later described Susan's mindset not as psychotic, but avoidant, not driven by rage, but by entitlement to escape. She did not want to be a mother anymore, and instead of leaving, she erased. This distinction matters, because this was not a loss of control. It was the pursuit of control. In court, the narrative were tightened. Prosecutors laid out evidence methodically. They did not need theatrics. The facts were sufficient. They described how decisions were made, how steps were followed, how alternatives existed. The defense emphasized trauma, mental health, emotional fragility. But fragility does not negate intention. Susan Smith was convicted of 2 counts of murder. She received life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. No sentence could restore what was taken. What remains is the weight of understanding.
Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children.
The motive? She was having an affair with a man who didn't want children. Smith was sentenced to life and became eligible for parole this month.
Michael and Alexander are remembered not for how they died, but for how ordinary their lives were, for how deeply they trusted the routine meant to protect them. This case lingers not because of violence, but because of quiet, because nothing exploded, because nothing warned, because the most dangerous moment was the one that looked most normal. Silence can be lethal when it replaces confrontation. Avoidance can become permission. Fantasy can harden into decision. And some crimes are not acts of destruction. They are exits. If you're still here, take a moment. Not to react, but to reflect. Engage with this story by sharing it responsibly, discussing it thoughtfully, and remembering the lives at its center. Understanding is not forgiveness, but it is vigilance, and it is how silence is finally broken.
30 years after she was convicted for drowning her little boys in her car, Susan Smith is asking a South Carolina parole board to free her from prison. 3 decades ago at her press conference seen around the world, Smith cried crocodile tears. And as Amber Cagliano reports, people are once again accusing her of faking her emotions.
The notorious Susan Smith, who drowned her 2 little boys, wants out of prison.
What I did was horrible.
53-year-old Smith sobbed as she appeared via video before a parole board in South Carolina today.
I'm sorry. I don't know. I know that's not enough. I know it's not.
But are those crocodile tears? I don't see tears, says one reporter covering the story.
What do you think is the most important thing that you have learned while you have been incarcerated?
That people are important, that forgiveness and love, that family is important.
The boy's father, David Smith, was there, accompanied by a large entourage who all oppose her release. He wore a photo of his sons on his lapel.
Well, I'm asking that you please do not hurt parole today. And hopefully in the future, but specifically today.
In 1994, he stood at her side, believing her story that she had been carjacked by a black man who kidnapped her sons, Michael and Alex.
I would like to say to whoever has my children that they please I mean, please bring them home.
The shocking truth emerged after 9 days when cops learned Smith had buckled the boys into their kiddie seats and rolled her car into a lake.
Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children.
The motive? She was having an affair with a man who didn't want children. Smith was sentenced to life and became eligible for parole this month.
Susan Smith has had a checkered record behind bars. She was accused of having had sex with 2 guards. She was disciplined for drug use.
Alfred Rowe was one of the guards she had sex with. He lost his job and was sentenced to 5 years probation for sexual misconduct with an inmate.
She belongs behind bars.
40 minutes after Smith made her plea for freedom, the parole board voted.
Ms. Susan Smith is denied parole. The vote is unanimous.